Welcome to the Solocast of Firecode Tech. In these episodes, it's just going to be me, your host, Gus Gagliardi. There's going to be a range of topics, but I'm going to talk about specific technologies, installation standards, codes and how they work, as well as some other interesting topics that don't neatly fit inside of the context of a normal interview. Hello all, welcome to episode 16 of the Solocast of Firecode Tech. On this episode, we're talking about hazard determination. So one of the first steps and most important steps of designing a fire sprinkler system is determining the hazard. When I was learning how to design sprinkler systems in my first role in the industry, I found this to be one of the most difficult topics. There are a couple different things and, just parts of being a professional that there aren't a lot of hacks for other than time and experience and reps and sets. And I think this is one of them. So I wanted to break into how I learned to, determine hazard, some tips and places where you can look to learn more about the subject. And also just to explore the process of it and to dive into the codes and standards around hazard determination and some of the different approaches there are to applying a hazard to a building or a portion of a building. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media so you never miss an episode. Also, if you could please smash the like button and give us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be such a big help. Let's get into the episode. So we talked a little bit about hazard determination in our episode about hydraulic calculations, and I started to get into quite a long stint about how to quantify a hazard, and I realized that this probably needs to be in an episode of its own. So here we go. Here's that episode. So the primary document for installing fire sprinkler systems in the United States is NFPA 13, which is going to be the document that talks about how to quantify hazards, some of the different characteristics of said hazards, and some of the pertinent definitions for the process that we're talking about. There are other places where you can find information about hazard determination, like the building code and the fire code, but I'd say first and foremost we start with NFPA 13. So when I was learning about hazard determination, the NFPA edition that I was using was the 2013 edition, which was what was adopted in Omaha at the time when I was starting to work. But the 2019 edition of the standard no longer has hazard determination in the same area as it was reorganized substantially in the 2019 edition. So in the 2013 edition, we're looking at Chapter 5, Classifications of Occupancies and Commodities. So in the 2019 edition of the standard, it's in Chapter 4, where it describes light hazard, ordinary hazard 1 and 2, and extra hazard 1 and 2. So let's go over the differences and similarities between the 2013 and 2019 classifications of hazard for occupancy. So you could say hazard determination or occupancy classification, or there's a variety of terms, but basically we are trying to quantify the combustible loading or the amount of material in a space that can catch on fire and sustain combustion and sort of quantify that hazard in broad terms so that we can apply densities, so how much water per square foot is appropriate for how much combustibles. So in the 2013 edition, there's a little bit more of a wordy explanation. So light hazard is described as light hazard occupancy shall be defined as occupancies a portion of other occupancies where the quantity and or combustibility of contents is low and fires with relatively low rates of heats of release are expected. If we take a look at the 2019 version of this definition, it's stated a little differently, and I would say more concisely. It says, the following shall be protected with light hazard occupancy criteria in this standard. Then it says, spaces with low quantity and combustibility of contents. So a lot more to read in between the lines with this second statement in NFPA 13 2019 edition. So in either case, that's a very vague definition. Who defines what a, light combustible loading or what a low heat release rate is? And so the standard doesn't explicitly state these things, but they do offer annex material to guide your interpretation of these guidelines. So if you look at the information in the annex corresponding to this portion or definition of light hazard occupancies, you can find 16 examples of in the 2013 edition of light hazard occupancies. And so in time, you will learn through application of hazard determination and, reps and sets and looking at different buildings, what spaces constitute low combustible loading. And so, examples given in the annex of light hazard are animal shelters, churches, clubs, eaves, overhangs, and overhangs, hospitals, including animal hospitals and veterinarian facilities, institutional facilities, kennels, libraries and several large stack rooms, museums, nursing or convalescent homes, offices included data processing, residential, restaurant seating areas, theaters, auditoriums, excluding stages and prosceniums, and unused attics. So I probably didn't need to read all of those, but I wanted to give a good idea of what these light hazard occupancies look like. So when I think of light hazard occupancy, traditionally I think of business occupancy, low combustible loading, kind of sparse, desks or seating arrangements, nothing industrial or storage-like. Moving on, the next two categories are ordinary hazard 1 and ordinary hazard 2. When looking at ordinary hazard and extra hazard, ordinary hazard 1 and extra hazard 1 are less hazardous than ordinary hazard 2 and extra hazard 2. Ordinary hazard group 1 occupancies shall be defined as occupancies or portions of other occupancies where combustibility is low, quantities of combustibles is moderate, stockpiles of combustibles do not exceed 8 feet, and fires with moderate rates of heat release are expected. Ordinary hazard group 1 in the 2019 edition is stated as the following. The following shall be protected with OH1 occupancy criteria in the standard. Number 1, spaces with moderate quantity of and low combustibility of contents. Stockpiles, this is the second option, stockpiles of contents with low combustibility that do not exceed 8 feet. So when I think of ordinary hazard 1 group occupancies, I think of rooms that might contain stores of materials, maybe more than you might expect. General storage in business buildings, maybe a janitor's closet with stockpiles of extra materials, just some rooms in buildings that are more hazardous than occupied and sparsely loaded combustibles. And so it's really just the next step up and is also very common in a low hazard occupancy. Here are a couple of examples of ordinary hazard group 1 occupancies. Automobile parking and showrooms, bakeries, beverage manufacturing, canneries, dairy products manufacturing and processing, electronics plants, glass and products manufacturing, laundries, restaurant service areas, porte cocheres, and mechanical rooms. So what you can tell about most of these different examples of Group 1 ordinary hazard 1 occupancies is that there are combustibles more than average in just a general sense, but they're fairly non-combustible and there is just a moderate amount of them. Notice that there is a storage height threshold of less than 8 feet. This is important. Remember that when we get in excess of 12 feet, we are in high-piled storage classification by the building code. Moving on to Ordinary Hazard Group 2. Ordinary Hazard Group 2 is described as the following. The following shall be protected with OH2 occupancy criteria for this standard. Spaces with moderate to high quantity and combustibility of contents. And the second part of this description is stockpiles of contents with moderate to high combustibility that do not exceed 12 feet. There are quite a lot of different examples of Ordinary Hazard Group 2, but let's rip off the first 10. Agricultural facilities, barns and stables, cereal mills, chemical plants, ordinary confectionery products, distilleries, dry cleaners, exterior loading docks. Note that exterior loading docks only used for loading and unloading of ordinary combustibles shall be classified as OH2. For the handling of flammable and combustible liquids, hazardous materials, or were utilized for storage, exterior loading docks and all interior loading docks should be protected based on the actual occupancy and the materials handled on the dock, if the materials were actually stored in that configuration. Well, I almost made it all the way through that without messing up, but I guess you have to live through one mess up. And then the last two are feed mills and horse stables. So there are a couple more examples, about 20 more actually. And so what you can think about Ordinary Hazard 2 is we really start to get into some pretty hazardous situations. Some different manufacturing and high storage areas. And we're really starting to get close to miscellaneous storage of fairly dangerous things. And so I don't have a lot of great examples. I'd say a really good one is repair garages. I think that pretty much perfectly embodies what I think of Ordinary Hazard Group 2 occupancy. And yeah, so think of it, it's definitely more dangerous, could potentially have some flammables and combustibles, but obviously that has to be limited. So yeah, so I think I'm going to end it at Ordinary Hazard Group 2, and in the Solocast bonus episode on the Patreon, we will finish up Extra Hazard and break into classification of commodities maybe. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time on Fire Code Tech. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.